Chapter 1. The Day. Everything shattered. On the day my husband died, my daughter-in-law said, "Pack up your things and get out of here. I don't want to hear the crying of someone who never deserved love." My son dumped me at an abandoned train station and said, "Never show up again, you old hag." The next morning, their hands trembled when they read my letter from the attorney. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I ended up sitting on a cold metal bench at 2 a.m., clutching a single suitcase and wondering how 38 years of marriage and motherhood had led to this moment. Harold died on a Tuesday, not peacefully in his sleep like we'd always hoped, but suddenly, clutching his chest in our kitchen while I was making his favorite oatmeal cookies. The paramedics said it was massive. There was nothing anyone could have done. One moment he was laughing at something on the morning news. The next he was gone. I called Kevin immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
He arrived within an hour with Rebecca, his wife of 6 years. I should have known something was wrong by the way Rebecca surveyed our modest living room with those calculating eyes of hers. The same look she got when browsing antique shops for underpriced treasures. The funeral was small. Harold had been a quiet man who preferred books to crowds, gardens to parties. We'd planned it that way years ago during one of those uncomfortable conversations married couples have in their 60s. Rebecca took charge immediately, which I appreciated at first. Grief makes simple decisions feel impossible. "Mom, you just focus on getting through today," Kevin said, adjusting his black tie. He looked so much like Harold in that moment it took my breath away. Rebecca's handled everything. Rebecca had indeed handled everything. She'd chosen the flowers, written the obituary, even selected my outfit, a simple black dress she'd brought from her own closet. It hung loose on my smaller frame, making me look exactly like what I was, a woman who'd suddenly become invisible. During the service, I noticed things. How Rebecca positioned herself between Kevin and me in the front pew. How she answered condolences meant for me with gracious nods and tissue dabs at dry eyes. How she guided conversations away whenever someone mentioned Harold's love for our little garden or his pride in the furniture he'd built by hand. After the burial, people came back to the house. Harold's co-workers, neighbors, my sister Martha, who'd driven 4 hours from Portland. Rebecca moved through our home like a hostess, serving coffee from our good china and accepting casseroles with promises to make sure I ate properly. That's when I overheard the conversation that changed everything. I was in the hallway, returning from the bathroom, when Rebecca's voice carried from the kitchen. She was talking to her mother, Carol, who'd flown in from Phoenix. "The house is paid off, thank God," Rebecca was saying in that brisk tone she used for practical matters. "Kevin says his father never believed in debt. The life insurance should cover funeral expenses with some left over." "What about her?" Carol asked, and I knew she meant me. Rebecca's laugh was soft, but there was something sharp underneath it. "Kevin's been worried about Mom for months. She's been forgetting things, getting confused about bills. We think it's time she moved somewhere with more support." My hands went cold. I hadn't been forgetting anything. I balanced our checkbook to the penny every month, just like Harold had taught me. I managed our small investments, paid bills on time, kept meticulous records of everything. "The Sunset Manor has an opening," Rebecca continued. "Kevin toured it last week. It's perfect for someone in her condition." Condition. As if being a widow was a medical diagnosis requiring institutional care. I backed away from the kitchen, my heart pounding. They'd been planning this. While I was grieving my husband, they were planning my exile. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. People offered condolences and shared memories of Harold while I smiled and nodded, my mind racing. When had Kevin started seeing me as a problem to be solved rather than a mother who needed comfort? As the last guests left, I began cleaning up, grateful for something to do with my hands. Rebecca appeared beside me, gently taking plates from my grasp. "Mom, you shouldn't be doing this. You need to rest." "I'm fine," I said, reaching for another plate. "Keeping busy helps." Rebecca's grip tightened on my wrist. "No, you're not fine. Kevin and I have been talking. You can't stay here alone. It's not safe." Kevin emerged from the living room where he'd been talking quietly with Carol. His face wore that patient expression I remembered from his teenage years when he thought I was being unreasonable. "Mom, we found a wonderful place for you. Sunset Manor has everything you need. Meals, activities, medical care on site. You'll make friends. I don't want to make friends, I said, my voice coming out smaller than intended. I want to stay in my home. This isn't your home anymore, Rebecca said, her mask of sympathy finally slipping. It's ours. Kevin inherited everything, and we have plans. The words hit me like a physical blow. Kevin inherited everything. When had that been decided? Harold and I had always talked about how the house would be mine for as long as I lived, then go to Kevin eventually. I need to see Harold's will, I said. Kevin's jaw tightened. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. Dad left everything to me because he knew I'd take care of you. That's what we're doing. By putting me in a nursing home? By putting you somewhere safe where people can watch over you, Rebecca interjected. We've already put a deposit down. You move in Monday. Monday, 5 days after my husband's funeral. That night, after Kevin and Rebecca left for their hotel, I searched through Harold's desk for our important papers. Our copy of the will was gone. So were our bank statements, insurance policies, and the deed to the house. Everything that proved this life belonged to me had vanished. I called our attorney, Mr. Patterson, but got his answering service. I left a message, my voice cracking as I explained that I needed to see Harold's will immediately. Kevin and Rebecca returned the next morning with boxes and an efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. Rebecca directed Kevin through our house like a general commanding troops. The good china goes to storage. We'll keep the antique sideboard but donate the rest of the dining room furniture. Most of her clothes can go to Goodwill. They were dismantling 38 years of marriage like it was a garage sale. What about Harold's workshop? I asked. He'd spent countless hours in the garage, building birdhouses and small furniture pieces. His tools were still arranged exactly as he'd left them. We'll donate the tools, Rebecca said without looking up from her clipboard. Kevin doesn't have time for hobbies. By evening, our home looked like strangers lived there. My personal items filled 3 boxes. Everything else had been sorted, donated, or claimed by Rebecca for their future plans. That's when she said it. I was sitting in Harold's chair, holding the only photo they'd allowed me to keep, our wedding picture from 1985, when Rebecca looked at me with undisguised disgust. Pack up your things and get out of here. I don't want to hear the crying of someone who never deserved love. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Kevin stood behind her, saying nothing. Kevin? I whispered, looking at my son. Please. He couldn't meet my eyes. Mom, you need to understand. Rebecca and I are starting our lives together. We can't be responsible for taking care of you too. I don't need taking care of. I need my family. You need professional care, Rebecca snapped. You're confused. You're emotional, and frankly, you're being selfish. Kevin has obligations to his wife now, not to his needy mother. That's when Kevin finally spoke the words that shattered what remained of my heart. Mom, I'll drive you to the train station. You can take the bus to Sunset Manor from downtown. The ride to the station was silent. Kevin's hands gripped the steering wheel while I stared out the window at the city Harold and I had called home for 4 decades. When we pulled up to the deserted platform, Kevin finally looked at me. This is for the best, Mom. You'll see. I got out with my single suitcase, and Kevin drove away without another word. Never show up again, you old hag, had been his final message, delivered through his car window as he pulled away. I sat on that metal bench until dawn, listening to the distant rumble of freight trains and wondering how I'd become so dispensable to the people I'd loved most. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the empty platform, I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, their hands would indeed tremble when they read my letter from the attorney. The first bus to downtown didn't arrive until 6:47 a.m. I sat on that bench for nearly 5 hours, my thoughts cycling between disbelief and a growing anger I'd never felt before. How had I become so blind to what was happening in my own life? As the city woke up around me, I pulled out my phone and called Mr. Patterson's office again. This time, his secretary answered. Mrs. Whitmore? Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Patterson has been trying to reach you. Can you come in this morning? He said it was urgent regarding Mr. Harold's estate. Urgent. The word sent a chill through me. I'll be there as soon as I can. Mr. Patterson's office was in the same building where Harold and I had updated our wills 5 years ago. I remembered that day clearly, because Harold had insisted on some changes that seemed odd at the time. He'd been unusually serious, almost secretive about the details. Dorothy, Mr. Patterson said, rising from his desk as I entered. He looked uncomfortable, which was unusual for a man who'd handled legal matters for our family for over 20 years. Please, sit down. I have some things to discuss with you that I think will come as quite a shock. I clutched my purse tighter. Kevin said Harold left everything to him. Is that true? Mr. Patterson's eyebrows shot up. Kevin said what? He shuffled through a thick file on his desk. Dorothy, I need to ask you something important. Did you and Harold ever discuss the changes he made to his will in 2019? Changes? My voice came out as a whisper. What changes? Harold came to see me alone that spring. He said he wanted to create what we call a testamentary trust with very specific conditions. Mr. Patterson leaned forward, his expression grave. He was concerned about Kevin's marriage to Rebecca. He'd noticed some troubling patterns in her behavior. The room seemed to tilt. What kind of patterns? Harold mentioned that Rebecca had been pressuring Kevin to ask you to sign over the house deed. She'd also been asking detailed questions about your financial accounts and life insurance policies. Harold was worried she was manipulating Kevin against you. I thought back to that spring. Rebecca had indeed been unusually interested in our finances. She'd suggested we needed a family financial plan and had even offered to help organize our important papers. I'd been touched by her concern at the time. So what did Harold do? Mr. Patterson pulled out a thick document. He created a complex trust structure. On paper, yes, Kevin inherits the house and assets, but there are conditions that must be met, and if they're not... He paused, studying my face. Dorothy, Harold protected you in ways that won't become apparent until certain triggering events occur. I don't understand. The will that Kevin has seen is real, but it's not complete. There's a codicil, a secret amendment that only activates if specific circumstances happen. Harold was very precise about this. My hands were shaking now. What circumstances? If Kevin allows you to be mistreated, abandoned, or placed in institutional care against your will within 1 year of Harold's death, the entire inheritance reverts to you. Not just the house, Dorothy. Everything. The words didn't make sense at first. I stared at Mr. Patterson, trying to process what he was telling me. Harold suspected something like this might happen, he continued gently. He loved Kevin, but he wasn't blind to Rebecca's influence. He spent months documenting concerning incidents. Her dismissive treatment of you, her attempts to isolate you from family decisions, her obvious impatience with your presence. He never said anything to me. He hoped he was wrong, but he wanted to protect you just in case. Mr. Patterson opened another file. Dorothy, there's something else. Harold had been building a separate financial portfolio for the past 6 years. Accounts that Rebecca and Kevin don't know about. He slid a statement across the desk. The numbers swam before my eyes. Investment accounts, CDs, even a small commercial property downtown that Harold had bought and rented out. All in both our names. But with survivor benefits, that meant everything now belonged to me. This can't be real, I whispered. It's very real. Harold was more financially savvy than anyone knew. He'd been quietly investing a portion of his salary for years, preparing for both your retirements and, it turns out, for the possibility that you might need to start over without Kevin's support. I thought about all the times Harold had mentioned taking care of business downtown or meeting with some financial people. I'd assumed it was related to his job at the electronics company. I'd never asked for details because Harold had always handled our finances competently. How much? I asked. Including the property and investments, approximately $340,000, plus the house and life insurance, which now legally belongs to you under the codicil's terms. The train station bench suddenly felt very far away. Yesterday, I'd been a penniless widow facing life in a nursing home. Today, I was learning that my husband had spent years planning for my independence. There's more, Mr. Patterson said. Harold left detailed instructions about what to do if the codicil was triggered. He even selected a private investigator to document Kevin and Rebecca's treatment of you. A private investigator? Harold wanted irrefutable proof if legal challenges arose. The investigator has been monitoring the situation since Harold's death. The photos and recordings from yesterday are quite damning. My mind reeled. Harold had been protecting me even after death, orchestrating my salvation from beyond the grave. What do I do now? Mr. Patterson smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Now, Dorothy, you have choices. Real choices. You can claim what's rightfully yours, or you can give Kevin and Rebecca one opportunity to make things right. But either way, you're not powerless anymore. He handed me a set of keys. These are to the downtown property Harold owned. It's a small apartment above the antique shop on Main Street. Harold had it renovated last year. He said it might be perfect for someone who needed a fresh start. I stared at the keys, feeling their weight in my palm. Harold had thought of everything. There's one more thing, Mr. Patterson said. Harold left you a letter. He instructed me to give it to you only if the codicil was triggered. He handed me an envelope with my name written in Harold's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Dorothy, it began. If you're reading this, then my worst fears about Kevin and Rebecca have come true. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the pain they've caused, but I hope I've given you the tools to protect yourself. The letter went on to explain Harold's suspicions, his quiet investigations, and his growing certainty that Rebecca was planning to push me out of Kevin's life entirely. You are the strongest woman I've ever known, Harold had written. You raised our son to be a good man, but somewhere along the way, he forgot the values we taught him. Don't let their cruelty convince you that you're worthless. You're worth everything to me, and now you have the means to prove your worth to yourself. Tears streamed down my face as I read his final words. Be fierce, my love. Show them who Dorothy Whitmore really is. Mr. Patterson waited quietly while I composed myself. Finally, I looked up at him. They think I'm at Sunset Manor right now, don't they? According to my information, yes. Kevin called this morning to confirm your arrival. A smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile I'd felt since Harold's death. Then let them think that a little longer. I have some planning to do. As I left Mr. Patterson's office with Harold's keys in my pocket and a new bank account in my name, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Not the kind that comes from controlling others, but the kind that comes from controlling your own destiny. Kevin and Rebecca were about to discover that dismissing Dorothy Whitmore had been the biggest mistake of their lives. The old woman they'd thrown away like garbage was gone forever. In her place stood someone they'd never met before. A woman with resources, legal backing, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Tomorrow, their comfortable assumptions about inheriting Harold's modest estate would crumble. But tonight, I had preparations to make. The apartment above the antique shop was nothing like I'd expected. Harold had transformed what must have been a cramped storage space into a cozy one-bedroom home. Hardwood floors gleamed under warm lighting, and the kitchen had been updated with modern appliances. Fresh flowers sat on the dining table with a note in Harold's handwriting. Welcome home, my fierce Dorothy. Even in death, he was still taking care of me. I spent my first night there going through the documents Mr. Patterson had given me. Harold's secret files painted a picture of systematic manipulation that made my stomach turn. He'd documented everything. Rebecca's gradual isolation of me from family decisions, her subtle criticisms that made Kevin question my competence, even recordings from family dinners where she'd poisoned conversations against me. The most damning evidence was a series of emails Harold had found on Kevin's computer when he'd helped fix it last Christmas. Rebecca had been corresponding with Sunset Manor for months, pricing different care packages and discussing payment options. She'd even sent photos of me without my knowledge, describing me as increasingly confused and unable to manage independently. But it was the final email that made my hands shake with rage. Rebecca had written to the facility director, Kevin's mother has become a burden we can no longer handle. She's resistant to change and frankly quite selfish about giving up her independence. We need her placed as soon as possible after the funeral so we can move forward with our lives. Harold had printed everything. He'd even hired a tech specialist to recover deleted messages that showed Rebecca coaching Kevin on what to say to me, how to gradually undermine my confidence, and when to suggest I was forgetting things. I hadn't been forgetting anything. I'd been gaslit by my own daughter-in-law with my son's complicity. The next morning, I called the private investigator Harold had hired. James Martinez met me at a coffee shop downtown, bringing a folder thick with photographs and audio recordings. "Your husband was thorough," James said, sliding the folder across the table. "He wanted to make sure you'd have everything you needed if things went the way he suspected they would." The photos were devastating. Rebecca and Kevin at the house yesterday, laughing as they loaded Harold's workshop tools into their car. Rebecca trying on my jewelry in our bedroom mirror, modeling pieces with theatrical poses. Kevin packing Harold's fishing gear while talking on the phone, saying, "Yeah, we'll be rid of all the old man's junk by this weekend." "There's audio too," James said. "Your husband had me install recording devices in common areas of the house after he noticed Rebecca going through your personal papers when you weren't home." He handed me a small digital recorder. "This is from yesterday evening, after they thought you were safely tucked away at Sunset Manor." I pressed play with trembling fingers. Rebecca's voice filled the small speaker. "I can't believe how easy that was. She didn't even fight us." Kevin's response made my heart shatter all over again. "I thought she'd be more difficult about leaving. Guess she knew she didn't have a choice. Your father always said she was stronger than she looked, but I never saw it. She's just a weak old woman who outlived her usefulness." There was a pause. Then Kevin's voice again. "Sometimes I feel bad about how we handled things." "Don't," Rebecca snapped. "She would have been a constant burden. This way, she's someone else's problem and we get to start fresh. Your father's life insurance will cover the down payment on the Oakwood house, and once we sell this place, we'll have enough to live exactly how we want. What if she tries to contact us?" Rebecca laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Kevin, she's 68 years old with no money, no car, and no family support. What's she going to do? Send angry letters from the nursing home? Let her. We have legal documentation that she willingly went to Sunset Manor for her own safety." I stopped the recording, my hands shaking too badly to hold the device steady. "There's more," James said gently, "but maybe you've heard enough for now." "No," I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. "I want to hear everything." The rest of the recordings revealed the full scope of their betrayal. Rebecca had been forging my signature on documents for months, changing my emergency contacts at the doctor's office to remove myself and list only Kevin. She'd told my few remaining friends that I was going through a difficult adjustment and preferred not to have visitors. She'd even contacted my sister Martha, telling her I'd asked not to be contacted while I was processing my grief. No wonder I'd felt so isolated in recent months. Rebecca had been systematically cutting me off from everyone who might have supported me or questioned what was happening. "Your husband documented at least 12 instances of financial manipulation," James continued. "Rebecca convinced Kevin to ask you to consolidate your bank accounts for easier management. She had him suggest you add both their names to your checking account for emergencies. She was planning to drain your savings gradually once you were in the nursing home. But Harold stopped it? He removed both their names from all accounts 3 weeks before he died. Rebecca and Kevin have no idea their access has been revoked. They probably plan to start transferring your money this week." I thought about Rebecca's confidence yesterday, her assumption that they could simply take over my life without consequence. They had no idea Harold had been 10 steps ahead of them. "What's my next move?" I asked. James smiled grimly. "That depends on what kind of justice you want. Legal, poetic, or both?" That afternoon, I made several phone calls, first to Sunset Manor, explaining that there had been a misunderstanding about my admission. The administrator was confused but accommodating when I explained that my family had made arrangements without my consent during my grief period. "We haven't received any payment yet," she told me. "Your son called yesterday to confirm your arrival, but when you didn't show up, we assumed the plans had changed." Next, I called my sister Martha. "Dorothy? Oh, honey, I've been so worried. Rebecca said you needed space to grieve, but it didn't sound like you. I almost drove down there anyway. Martha, I need to tell you some things about Kevin and Rebecca. Can you come visit me this weekend?" "Of course, sweetheart. Where are you staying? Rebecca said you'd moved to some kind of assisted living facility." "I'm in Harold's apartment downtown. It's a long story." My final call was the most important one. I dialed Kevin's number, my heart pounding as it rang. "Mom?" His voice was surprised, confused. "I thought you were getting settled at Sunset Manor. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Kevin. I'm calling to let you know I've decided not to move into Sunset Manor after all." A long pause. Then, "Mom, we talked about this. You can't live alone anymore." It's not safe. I'm not living alone. I'm living in the apartment Harold left me downtown, the one he prepared for exactly this situation. Another pause, longer this time. In the background, I could hear Rebecca's voice. What apartment? What is she talking about? Kevin, I said calmly, I think you and Rebecca should come see me tomorrow. We have a lot to discuss about Harold's estate and your future plans. Mom, you're not making sense. Dad didn't have any downtown apartment. 1 o'clock tomorrow, Kevin. The address is 247 Main Street, apartment 2B, above Morrison's Antiques. Come alone or come with Rebecca, your choice. But come prepared to have a very honest conversation about what you've both been doing. I hung up before he could respond, my hands surprisingly steady. Tomorrow, Kevin and Rebecca would discover that the helpless old woman they'd discarded no longer existed. In her place was Dorothy Whitmore, a woman with resources, legal protection, and documentary evidence of every cruel manipulation they'd inflicted. They'd spent months planning my destruction. Now it was my turn to plan theirs. Harold's letter had told me to be fierce. Tomorrow, they'd learn exactly what fierce looked like. They arrived 20 minutes late, which didn't surprise me. Rebecca had always believed that making others wait demonstrated her importance. Through my apartment window, I watched them climb the narrow stairs to my door, Rebecca's designer heels clicking impatiently against the wooden steps. Kevin looked nervous, glancing around as if he expected some kind of trap. Rebecca walked with her usual confidence, but I could see the calculation in her eyes as she surveyed the building, probably wondering how much rent Harold had been paying without their knowledge. When I opened the door, Rebecca's expression shifted from confusion to poorly concealed anger. Dorothy, what is this place? Kevin said Harold left you an apartment, but that's impossible. We went through all his papers. Come in, I said calmly, stepping aside. We have a lot to discuss. They followed me into the living room, where I'd carefully arranged Harold's evidence files on the coffee table. Kevin's eyes immediately went to the folders, while Rebecca continued scanning the apartment with obvious frustration. This is a nice place, Kevin said, his voice uncertain. I don't understand why Dad never mentioned it. Your father mentioned lots of things you chose not to hear, I replied, settling into Harold's favorite armchair. I'd brought it from the house yesterday while they were out celebrating their victory. Please, sit down. Rebecca perched on the edge of the couch, her posture rigid. Dorothy, we need to talk about your behavior yesterday, refusing to go to Sunset Manor, hanging up on Kevin. This kind of erratic conduct is exactly why we're concerned about your mental state. My mental state, I repeated slowly. That's interesting, Rebecca. Tell me, what specifically concerns you about my mental state? She exchanged a glance with Kevin before launching into what was clearly a rehearsed speech. You've been increasingly forgetful, making poor decisions about finances, showing signs of confusion about daily tasks. Kevin and I have been documenting these incidents because we love you and want to ensure you get proper care. Documenting, I said. How thorough of you. I picked up the first folder from the coffee table. I've been doing some documenting myself. Kevin leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Mom, what are you talking about? I opened the folder and pulled out the first email printout. This is correspondence between Rebecca and Sunset Manor, dated 6 months ago, long before Harold's death. Rebecca was pricing care packages and describing me as increasingly confused and unable to manage independently. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Kevin took the paper with shaking hands. Rebecca? Kevin's voice was barely a whisper. You contacted them 6 months ago? I was being proactive, Rebecca said quickly. I could see the signs even if you couldn't. Your mother needed help. What signs? I asked, pulling out another document. The sign where I balanced our checkbook perfectly every month? The sign where I managed Harold's medications without error? Or maybe the sign where I noticed you going through our personal papers when you thought I wasn't looking? Kevin was reading the email, his face growing paler by the moment. Rebecca, this says Mom is resistant to change and frankly quite selfish. You wrote that she's become a burden we can't handle. Kevin, you have to understand the context. The context, I interrupted, is that you've been planning to get rid of me for months while pretending to care about my welfare. I pulled out the next set of documents. These are bank records showing that you had Kevin add your names to my checking account. Did you plan to tell me when you started transferring my money to your accounts? Rebecca stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Dorothy, you're clearly having some kind of paranoid episode. Kevin, we need to call her doctor. Sit down, Rebecca. The command in my voice surprised even me. We're not finished. I reached for the digital recorder James had given me. This was recorded yesterday evening in my kitchen, after you thought I was safely locked away in the nursing home. I pressed play. Rebecca's voice filled the room. I can't believe how easy that was. She didn't even fight us. Kevin's face went white as his own voice responded. I thought she'd be more difficult about leaving. Guess she knew she didn't have a choice. Your father always said she was stronger than she looked, but I never saw it. She's just a week-old woman who outlived her usefulness. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was deafening. Kevin, I said quietly, do you remember what you said next? He was staring at the recorder like it might bite him. I don't. You said you sometimes felt bad about how you handled things, and Rebecca told you not to feel bad because I would have been a constant burden, that this way I was someone else's problem. Kevin's hands were shaking now. Mom, she called me a weak-old woman who outlived her usefulness, I continued. And you didn't correct her. You didn't defend me. You agreed that I was a problem you were glad to dispose of. Rebecca's mask was finally slipping completely. This is entrapment. You can't record private conversations without consent. Actually, I can. Harold had recording devices installed in common areas of our home after he caught you forging my signature on documents. I pulled out another folder. These are photocopies of forms you signed with my name, emergency contact changes at my doctor's office, instructions to my bank about account management, even a preliminary application for long-term care insurance that I never authorized. Kevin was reading through the documents, his breathing becoming labored. Rebecca, did you really forge Mom's signature? I was helping her manage things she was too confused to handle herself. Confused about what? I demanded. About you telling my friends I didn't want visitors? About you informing my sister Martha that I needed space to grieve? About you systematically isolating me from everyone who might have questioned what you were doing? I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where Harold and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. Your father saw what you were doing, Rebecca. He documented everything. He protected me in ways you never imagined. What do you mean? Kevin's voice was small, defeated. I turned back to face them. Harold's will isn't what you think it is. There's a codicil that you've never seen. If I was mistreated, abandoned, or placed in institutional care against my will within 1 year of his death, the entire inheritance reverts to me. Rebecca shot to her feet. That's impossible. We have the will. Kevin inherits everything. You have part of the will. The part Harold wanted you to see. I walked to Harold's desk and pulled out the official documents Mr. Patterson had given me. This is the complete version, including the codicil that was activated the moment Kevin abandoned me at that train station. Kevin was reading over my shoulder, his face ashen. This says everything goes to you. The house, the life insurance, everything. Plus the accounts and properties Harold accumulated without your knowledge. The investments, the commercial real estate, the retirement funds you never knew existed. I looked directly at Rebecca. Harold was much wealthier than you realized. And now, it all belongs to me. Rebecca's carefully constructed world was crumbling before her eyes. Kevin, we can fight this. We can prove she's incompetent, that she manipulated your father. With what evidence? I asked. The forged documents you created? The recordings of you admitting I was lucid enough to resist your plans? The emails where you describe me as selfish rather than confused? Kevin sank back onto the couch, his head in his hands. Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought... Rebecca said you were getting confused, that you needed help. You thought what was convenient to think, I said, my voice steady but cold. You wanted to believe I was becoming a burden because it made your choices easier to justify. Rebecca was pacing now, her composure completely shattered. This is insane. Dorothy, you can't seriously plan to take everything. Kevin is your son. Think about his future, his children he might have someday. I did think about Kevin's future, I replied, for 32 years. I thought about it when I worked 2 jobs to help pay for his college. I thought about it when Harold and I sacrificed our own wants to ensure Kevin had everything he needed. I thought about it when we welcomed you into our family despite the red flags Harold and I both noticed. I walked back to the coffee table and gathered up the evidence files. But Kevin's future is no longer my responsibility. He's chosen his partner and his priorities. Now he gets to live with the consequences. Kevin looked up at me with tears in his eyes. What happens now? Now you have a choice, I said. You can accept that your actions have cost you Harold's inheritance and try to build a life based on your own efforts. Or you can spend your energy fighting legal battles you can't win with evidence that only makes you look worse. Rebecca was frantically scrolling through her phone. Kevin, call our lawyer. There has to be something we can do. But Kevin was staring at me with something that might have been recognition. You're not the same person who was sitting in Dad's chair crying 2 days ago. No, I agreed. That woman died when you drove away from the train station. The woman standing here now is someone you've never met before. Someone Harold spent years preparing for this exact moment. I walked to the door and opened it. I think it's time for you to leave. You have a lot to figure out, and I have a new life to build. As they reached the door, Kevin turned back one last time. Mom, is there any way? Can we fix this? I looked at my son. This man I'd raised and loved and lost to his own weakness and his wife's manipulation. Kevin, you stood by while your wife called me a burden and planned my exile. You drove me to a train station and told me never to show up again. Some things can't be fixed. The door closed behind them with a quiet click, and I was alone with the victory that felt nothing like I'd imagined it would. The silence after they left felt different from the lonely quiet I'd endured for months. This wasn't the silence of being ignored or forgotten. This was the silence of having spoken my truth and watching it land exactly where it needed to. I poured myself a cup of Harold's favorite coffee and sat in his chair, looking at the scattered evidence files that had just changed everything. My phone was already ringing. Dorothy? Martha's voice was breathless with excitement. Kevin just called me. He was crying, barely making sense. Something about Harold's will and you having an apartment? What's going on? I told her everything. The manipulation, the recordings, Harold's secret preparations, the confrontation that had just ended. Martha listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of outrage. That scheming little witch, she finally said. I knew something was wrong when she called me. Rebecca said you were processing grief in your own way and didn't want family contact. It didn't sound like you at all, but I thought maybe losing Harold had changed you. She counted on that, I said. She knew people would accept that grief makes people withdraw. What happens now? Will they try to fight the will? I thought about Kevin's broken expression as he read Harold's codicil, the way his shoulders had sagged when he realized the scope of what he'd lost. Kevin might want to, but he doesn't have grounds. Harold was meticulous about documentation. Besides, fighting would mean admitting in court that they abandoned me at a train station after clearing out my home without permission. The next few days brought a parade of revelations. Mr. Patterson called to inform me that Rebecca had already contacted 3 lawyers about contesting the will. All 3 had declined to take the case after reviewing Harold's documentation. She's getting desperate, he told me. One attorney said she became belligerent when he explained that her own recorded statements would be used against her in any legal proceedings. James Martinez stopped by with final reports from his investigation. Your husband asked me to continue monitoring for 2 weeks after his death. Just in case, you should see this. He showed me photos of Rebecca and Kevin loading a moving truck outside my old house. They were taking everything, even Harold's gardening tools and the small decorative items I'd collected over decades of marriage. They're selling the house, James explained. Listed it yesterday for $315,000. Apparently, they'd already made an offer on a larger property in Oakwood Heights, contingent on this sale. I studied the photos of strangers walking through rooms where Harold and I had shared 38 years of life. It should have hurt more than it did. They don't know yet that the sale can't proceed, I said. The house legally belongs to me now. The realtor is going to have a very awkward conversation with them soon. That evening, Kevin called. His voice was hollow, defeated. Mom, we need to talk about the house. There's been some kind of mistake with the paperwork. The title company says you're listed as the legal owner, but that can't be right. It's not a mistake, Kevin. A long pause. You're really taking everything? The house where I grew up? All of Dad's insurance money? I'm taking what Harold left me. What he always intended me to have. But Mom, we put a deposit down on another house. We signed contracts. If this sale doesn't go through, we'll lose everything we've put down. I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct to fix Kevin's problems, to protect him from consequences. Then I remembered Rebecca's voice calling me, a weak-old woman who outlived her usefulness. Kevin, 2 days ago you told me I was confused and incompetent. You abandoned me at a train station with a single suitcase. Why would you think I'd help you now? Because you're my mother. His voice cracked slightly. Because despite everything, I'm still your son. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. Even now, even after being caught in his cruelty, Kevin was trying to use my love against me. You're right, I said quietly. You are still my son. And if you had come to me yesterday and apologized, if you had acknowledged what you'd done and asked for forgiveness, we might have found a way forward. But instead, you brought Rebecca to threaten me with mental incompetency proceedings. She was just scared. We both were. This changes everything for us. It was supposed to change everything for me too, Kevin. I was supposed to spend my remaining years in institutional care while you and Rebecca lived in my house and spent Harold's money. The only difference is that my consequences were undeserved. When I hung up, I felt something unexpected. Relief. For months, I'd been walking on eggshells around Kevin and Rebecca, trying not to be a burden, accepting less and less space in my own life. Now the pretense was over. The relationship had been damaged beyond repair, but at least it was honest. 3 days later, Rebecca showed up at my apartment alone. She looked exhausted, her usual perfect appearance slightly disheveled. Dorothy, we need to talk woman to woman. I almost didn't let her in, but curiosity won. You have 5 minutes. She sat on my couch with none of her usual commanding presence. I know you hate me. I understand why. But Kevin is falling apart. He's barely eating, can't sleep. He keeps saying he's lost both his parents now. He has. Dorothy, please. I know I made mistakes. I was trying to protect Kevin from having to make difficult decisions about your care. I thought if I handled everything quietly, it would be easier for everyone. You thought if you isolated me from my support system and convinced my son I was incompetent, you could steal my life without consequences. Rebecca's facade cracked slightly. We needed that money. Kevin's business has been struggling for months. I've been putting family expenses on credit cards, trying to keep him from worrying. The house sale was supposed to solve everything. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then I remembered the recordings, the forged documents, the systematic cruelty. So you decided my independence was an acceptable sacrifice for your financial problems. I thought you'd be happier at Sunset Manor. They have activities, people your own age. Rebecca, stop. I've heard the recordings. I know what you really think of me. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder. Fine. You want honesty? Yes. I wanted you gone. You were always there, always watching, always making Kevin feel guilty for not calling enough or visiting enough. You represented his past, his obligations. I wanted him focused on our future. At least that's the truth. The truth is that Kevin loves you, and losing you is destroying him. Whatever you think of me, don't punish him for my mistakes. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse or continued manipulation. Rebecca, if Kevin had stood up for me even once, if he had questioned your narrative about my incompetence, if he had refused to abandon me at that train station, we might be having a different conversation. But he didn't. He chose you over me. And now he has to live with that choice. After she left, I called Mr. Patterson about transferring full ownership of all Harold's assets into my name. The process would take several weeks, but it was straightforward. What about the house? He asked. Do you want to move back in? I thought about it seriously for the first time. The house held decades of memories, but they were Harold's and mine. Kevin and Rebecca had already changed it, removing traces of our life together to make room for theirs. No, I said finally. I like it here. Harold chose this place for me specifically. It feels like a fresh start. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my old friend Eleanor from the book club. Rebecca had told her I was too grief-stricken for social contact. Dorothy, how are you, honey? I've been so worried. Rebecca said you needed time alone to process Harold's death. Rebecca said a lot of things that weren't true. Would you like to come for coffee tomorrow? I have a story to tell you. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about Kevin's words. "You're not the same person who was sitting in Dad's chair crying 2 days ago." He was right. That woman had been grieving not just Harold's death, but the gradual loss of her own identity, her autonomy, her place in the world. She had been disappearing long before Kevin drove her to the train station. The woman who existed now had resources, legal protection, and most importantly, the absolute clarity that comes from surviving betrayal. She owed nothing to anyone except herself. Harold had given her the tools for independence. Now it was time to build the life he'd always wanted her to have. Tomorrow, I would start looking at the possibilities that stretched ahead. Travel Harold and I had postponed, hobbies I'd abandoned, friendships I could rebuild, a life lived entirely on my own terms. For the first time since Harold's death, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind my apartment building, my hands deep in rich soil as I planted the tomatoes Harold had always loved. The space had been neglected for years, but the building owner was delighted when I offered to restore it in exchange for a small reduction in rent. "Mrs. Whitmore, you've transformed this place," called Mrs. Chen from the second-floor window. She was 92 and had become my closest friend in the building. "Harold would be so proud." I smiled, wiping my hands on the old gardening apron I'd rescued from my former house before Kevin and Rebecca finished stripping it bare. They'd sold it eventually, though for much less than they'd hoped. The buyers had been informed of the ownership dispute and negotiated accordingly. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Book club tonight at 7. We're discussing that mystery you recommended. Can't wait to hear what you think of Chapter 12. I'd rejoined the book club within a month of Harold's funeral, once I'd reconnected with the friends Rebecca had systematically separated me from. Eleanor had been shocked to learn how thoroughly I'd been isolated. "She told us you were having difficulty concentrating, that reading had become frustrating for you," Eleanor had explained. "We wanted to reach out, but she made it sound like we'd be overwhelming you." The lies had been so comprehensive, so carefully constructed. But one by one, I'd rebuilt the connections Rebecca had severed. Martha visited every few weeks now, marveling at my transformation each time. "You look younger," she'd said during her last visit. "More like the Dorothy I remember from before Kevin got married." It was true. I felt younger. The constant tension of walking on eggshells, of making myself smaller and quieter to avoid being a burden, had lifted. I woke up each morning excited about my day, rather than dreading it. I'd used some of Harold's money to travel, taking the trips we'd always planned for someday. Scotland, where Harold's grandfather had been born. Italy, where we'd honeymooned and promised to return for our 40th anniversary. Each journey carried his memory with me, but also created new experiences that were entirely my own. The commercial property Harold had secretly owned turned out to be a small bookstore whose previous tenant had struggled. I'd decided to try running it myself, something I never could have imagined doing while Kevin and Rebecca were convincing me I was too confused to manage my own affairs. "Morning, Dorothy," called Tom, the antique dealer from downstairs, as I headed inside to prepare for another day at the bookstore. "Early start today?" "New shipment coming in," I replied. "Mystery novels. They're surprisingly popular with the retirement community." I'd discovered I had a talent for understanding what people wanted to read, for creating the kind of comfortable space where customers lingered over coffee and book recommendations. Harold would have been amazed. I'd never shown much business sense during our marriage, but then again, I'd never been given the opportunity. The bookstore had become more than just a business. It was a gathering place for other women like me, widows who'd been written off by their families or convinced they were past their prime for independence. We'd formed an informal support group, sharing stories and resources, celebrating each other's victories. As I unlocked the store, I found an envelope that had been slipped under the door. My name was written in familiar handwriting that made my heart skip. Inside was a graduation announcement. Kevin had gone back to school, earning a certificate in automotive repair. The accompanying note was brief. "Mom, I thought you should know I'm trying to build something on my own. I understand if you don't want to respond, but I wanted you to know I think about you every day. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Love, Kevin." I sat behind the counter for a long time, holding the announcement. Kevin and Rebecca had divorced 4 months ago. I'd heard about it through Martha, who'd heard it from a mutual acquaintance. Apparently, Financial stress and legal bills had destroyed their marriage as thoroughly as their greed had destroyed their relationship with me. Kevin was living in a small apartment across town, working as a mechanic while attending night classes. Rebecca had moved back to her parents' house in another state. According to Martha's source, Kevin had refused to join any legal challenges Rebecca attempted to mount against Harold's will. The bell above the door chimed, and Eleanor entered with her usual morning energy. "Coffee's fresh," I said, tucking Kevin's note into my apron pocket. "And I have those new cozy mysteries you've been wanting." Eleanor was one of my success stories. She'd been living with her son and daughter-in-law, convinced she was too old and frail to manage independently. After hearing my story, she'd found her own apartment and was thriving. "Any word from Kevin lately?" she asked gently. Eleanor was one of the few people who knew the full story. "Actually, yes. I pulled out the graduation announcement. He's going to trade school." Eleanor studied my face carefully. "How do you feel about that?" It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. In quiet moments, I missed the son Kevin had been before Rebecca's influence took hold. I missed the little boy who'd brought me dandelions and told me I was the best mom in the world. But that child had grown into a man who chose manipulation over truth, who abandoned his mother at a train station because it was easier than standing up to his wife. "I feel proud that he's building his own life," I said finally, "and sad that it took losing everything for him to remember how to do that." "Will you respond?" I thought about it while I arranged the new books on their shelf. The old Dorothy might have rushed to reconcile, might have offered financial help or emotional support, might have tried to rebuild the relationship immediately. But the old Dorothy had also been someone who accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. "Maybe someday," I said, "when I'm sure he's learned to value people for who they are, not what they can provide." The morning passed peacefully with regular customers, book recommendations, and comfortable conversation. Around noon, James Martinez stopped by. He'd become a friend after our professional relationship ended, often bringing his elderly mother to browse my mystery section. "Dorothy, I have some news you might find interesting," he said, accepting his usual coffee. "Remember Rebecca's attempts to contest Harold's will? What about them?" "She made one final attempt last month, hired a lawyer in California, and tried to claim Harold wasn't mentally competent when he created the codicil." I felt a familiar surge of protective anger. "What happened?" James grinned. "The lawyer requested all medical records from Harold's final years. The documentation shows he was sharp as a tack right up until his heart attack. Meanwhile, the judge reviewed all the evidence Harold had compiled about Rebecca's manipulation. The case was dismissed with prejudice, which means she can never file again on the same grounds." "So it's really over?" "It's really over. Harold's protections held completely." That evening, after closing the bookstore, I climbed the stairs to my apartment and found myself looking through the photo albums I'd salvaged from my old house. Pictures of Kevin as a baby, as a child, as a young man before Rebecca entered his life. I could see Harold in his features, the kindness that had been buried under years of his wife's influence. I pulled out a piece of stationery and began writing. "Dear Kevin, thank you for letting me know about your graduation. I'm proud of you for choosing to build your own future. The work you're doing sounds honest and meaningful. I hope you're finding satisfaction in creating something with your own hands, the way your father always did." I paused, considering how much more to say. "I'm not ready for reconciliation yet. Too much trust was broken, and healing takes time. But I want you to know that I still love the son I raised, and I hope someday you'll be ready to have the difficult conversations about what happened between us. Until then, I wish you well." I signed it simply Mom and set it aside to mail tomorrow. Outside my window, the sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. Harold's photo smiled at me from the mantel, surrounded by pictures from my travels, my new friends, my independent life. The woman who had sat crying in Harold's chair 6 months ago couldn't have imagined this existence. She'd been so focused on what she was losing that she couldn't see what she might gain. She'd been taught to believe her value came from being needed, from sacrificing herself for others' comfort. This woman, the one Harold had spent years preparing for independence, understood that love without respect wasn't love at all. She'd learned that being alone was infinitely better than being diminished. She'd discovered that starting over at 68 wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Tomorrow, I would mail Kevin's letter and water my garden and open my bookstore and live exactly as I chose. I would continue building the life Harold had always wanted for me, one where I was valued for who I was, not what I could provide for others. Some people might call what happened to Kevin and Rebecca justice. Others might call it revenge. I preferred to think of it as consequence. They had chosen cruelty and manipulation over kindness and truth. They had chosen to discard someone who loved them rather than cherish that love. Now they were learning that actions have results, that betraying trust carries a price, that some mistakes can't be undone with apologies and regret. I was learning something too. That the fierce woman Harold had asked me to become wasn't cruel or vindictive. She was simply someone who refused to accept less than she deserved. As I prepared for bed, I whispered the same words I'd said every night since moving into Harold's apartment. Thank you for seeing who I could become and giving me the tools to get there. The silence that answered wasn't lonely anymore. It was the peaceful quiet of a woman who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger, who had lost a family but found herself, who had been discarded like garbage but discovered she was actually treasure. Harold had saved me one final time. Now the rest was up to me. And for the first time in years, that felt like a gift rather than a burden.